Good evening, everybody. Yeah, I just this morning had an interview with a Dutch organization that works with harm reduction and treatment for substance abuse. But what was interesting to me, in Europe, there's a great interest now in chemsex behavior, which is combining drugs and sex together in an addictive ritual among people that aren't necessarily gay, or bisexual, the group that we've traditionally considered. And of course, we have known all along, everybody has the potential for mixing drugs and alcohol, but there's a great deal of interest in this whole topic right now. So I think the book is really timely in a big way. So I'm excited about that. So the topic tonight, it always kind of is drawn from the experience and with some of the experience we're having with some clients recently, and also people in my own life in terms of clients. A theme has come up, and that is this kind of letting the intensity of our recovery practices and our program kind of get a little bit wishy-washy and move into the realm of complacency. And so I wanted to talk about complacency tonight, and complacency in recovery more specifically, and what that works. And I think when we define complacency, I'm talking about this kind of sense of satisfaction and contentment about where I'm at, right, in my recovery. And I think that can be a really dangerous place for someone. And I'm always kind of secretly pleased, I think, when our clients on their way out, when they're completing the program, say that they're both hopeful and excited, but nervous, some fear and anxiety. I think that's totally appropriate. They should be nervous. And recovery is it's not guaranteed, and it takes a lot of work, and it takes constant vigilance, and it takes that over time. And I think that's the issue that a lot of people have trouble with, going to that kind of marathon thing. But in early recovery, it's pretty easy, because addicts like novelty. This is a whole new experience, and new people, new friends, new meetings, new schedules, and we like all the intrigue and the newness of it. But very quickly, just like in our addiction, we develop sort of a tolerance, right? That newness kind of fades, the dopamine hits from all the new exciting things fade, and that novelty wears off. And much like kind of breaking in a new pair of shoes, recovery is all about getting comfortable in this and really going into it for the long haul. So what does that look like when this kind of complacency sets in recovery? I think it changes how people start to behave. So people may stop going to meetings, or go to fewer meetings, or go to a meeting but not share, or go to a meeting and be the first out the door at the end of the meeting without really talking to anybody or connecting with anybody. People may stop doing service. And I think service is an essential part of recovery, and giving to the program and giving to your fellow people in recovery. And we kind of lose interest in that and stop doing that. We may stop being what I call teachable, where I think the beauty of people at certain moments in the addictive cycle is that people are like, oh my God, what have I just done? And the denial is kind of broken for a brief moment, and people are teachable. And those are the moments where intervention is really most likely to succeed. But I think when people assume they know everything there is to know, when people have it all together, and when people know, when people become experts, I think that can be a problematic kind of attitude. Another sign of this, when people stop working on themselves, right? When they slow down on the steps, or get paused on the steps. I've had clients come to me who are already in recovery, and I'll use air quotes, but working on a fourth step for 2 years, but never quite getting through it, right? And I think that they get bogged down somewhere in the steps. Those are painful things to look at. They may have gone in therapy, and I do recommend therapy for people in recovery, and they may stop doing that. And once this happens, those old self-deceptions that we tell ourselves as addicts start to creep in. We start to rationalize, we get into black and white thinking, we might have something that's doctor prescribed, or maybe a certain kind of cannabis oil is legal in our state, so what's the problem? And all these different things can start to get kind of fuzzy around the edges. Also, circumstances change. Life doesn't stop in recovery, right? So people may divorce, people may have a death in the family. I mean, things happen. People may lose a job, and so these stressors may come along too, that kind of upsets the balance of recovery. So all this leads to an increased risk of relapse. And so these are really danger signs to me. So if you find yourself in that position, if any of this relates, so what do you do? And besides reversing kind of the things I just talked about, therapy and getting more involved, First of all, the thing is know when you're in danger. I think this is so important for every addict, not to think that they are somehow immune from getting in trouble, but really know. So how does it feel? You know, what is it, how does it feel in your body? What emotions do you get? Are you cranky? Are you irritable? Do you blame everybody? Are you starting to gas it a little bit? Is your lying, increasing to more than it was? Are you able to admit you made a mistake? Are you getting bored more easily? Are you getting things too sort of smoothly done, kind of glossing over the trouble spots? So all these are kind of attitudes that are not really engaged in the growth in the movement. You may start to experience more triggers and cues. And everybody experiences triggers and cues. Those are normal. Drug dreams, drunk dreams, acting out dreams are normal. They do lessen over time. But if we start to see a change in those, if you start to getting a lot more cravings, a lot more patterns, you're getting triggered a lot more than you were, that's also a sign that things are maybe getting a little dicey. And finally, in that regard, there's no like home free zone in terms of your length of time in recovery. No matter how long you're in recovery, you have the potential to relapse. I remember it was very striking to me when I first got into AA years ago. There was an old timer there that had 30 years or 30 some years. And he was like the anchor of the whole program where I got sober, and he relapsed. And it's just like, I couldn't believe it. No one else could either. Neither could he. But it was like early proof that, boy, that can happen. There are no guarantees. So know when you're in danger. The second thing was really kind of set realistic goals for yourself. Don't try to rework your life overnight, right? Many of us spent years in our addictive processes. It takes years to really move out of them. And so be patient, take it slow, take it in order, take it with some help, maybe some guidance from a therapist or your sponsor or accountability partners of helping you prioritize what should be done first. Start with a regular number of meetings. I think it's useful to go to the same meetings every week, and you can always change them over time. But if you're constantly shaking up your meetings, nobody is going to know when you're not there, right? You're not expected anywhere because nobody is used to seeing you there. So I think to really get into a routine, and I know addicts hate routines, but I think those kind of routines are really, really good. Things like if you're in behavioral addictions like food, which also is often an adjunct for sex addiction. There's a lot of food crossover. Be realistic about a food plan. Don't do that kind of total abstaining, fasting, dieting that we know from research and science just really often leads to failure. And then finally, in that realistic goals thing, really look at your boundaries. For the clients that graduate from our program, both they and their partners do have a lot of input on setting boundaries. It's going to make life in early recovery more realistic and reasonable. And sometimes we may find that those boundaries need to be adjusted a little bit as we move forward. And then a couple more. I talk here probably every week about the power of connection. And I think we really need to focus on staying connected. And I mean, staying connected to our recovery group, to our sponsor, to our recovery friends, to our accountability partner. That connection, we know, is the magic ingredient in recovery. It's incredibly important. And that I mentioned earlier about running out of the meeting without staying for the meeting after the meeting, as we say. That fellowship is incredibly important. That's as important as the meeting itself, most often, I think, in my opinion. A couple other things. Foster a sense of belonging. In my mind, in my own experience, and a lot of my clients, addicts have a hard time feeling like they belong somewhere. And I think people are really desperately searching for a place where they belong. But really, it's up to us, right? I think I've never been to an AA meeting that wasn't welcoming to me as a stranger. And I think it's up to me to kind of be open to that and reach out and try to connect, be open to that connection, because that's going to save my life. And that sense of belonging, that, okay, this is a group where I can go and be, and even, by the way, it may be a meeting I've never been before. I often talk about, I work in California a lot, but I live on the East Coast. And when I'm in California, I can go to a meeting that I've never been to before, and I feel right at home. I feel like I belong, because that's that sense of fellowship. And then finally, just a slogan that we often hear, that keep coming back, right? And I would say keep coming back no matter what, because no recovery is easy. Nobody has it smooth. There's going to be problems. There's going to be rough spots, but we don't give up. We can't. And so that complacency, you got to be on guard for it and really be careful. And I think I'll stop there. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, David. Is complacency sort of inevitable for most of us? I mean, is it something we really need to be aware of because it's going to happen, or?
In my experience, both personally and with clients, I think it happens to everybody. I think the degree to which it happens does vary. I don't know anybody that has had a smooth ride from day one, to recovery. But I think it doesn't have to, the risk for complacency, let me put it this way. I think the risk for complacency is always there. I don't think people necessarily have to fall into that trap, but I think we do have to recognize the need to keep that we are novelty addicts and we get bored easily, and to really take that into account and work on that. One of the ways to work on that, by the way, is not to constantly shake up our lives, but to build up that tolerance for sitting with discomfort, for sitting in a little bit of boredom, for sitting with some downtime, and just learning how to tolerate that a little bit more. But I think complacency is a risk certainly for everybody. But I think if we stay engaged and have enough accountability partners, and that can be literally an accountability partner or a therapist or a sponsor or just our friends who can call us out, I think we can correct it early on, and that makes it much more manageable.
As you were talking about knowing when you're in danger and then how to get out of danger, I immediately went to circle plans. If you're a sex addict out there, you have a circle plan, the inner red light circle is stuff it's a no-no, and then the middle yellow light circle is the slippery stuff, the danger stuff, and then the outer green light circle is things you can do that are healthy. And almost everything you listed as knowing when you're in danger is in my middle circle. It's boredom, it's all this things, and I in my middle circle I list the word because ... And what that means is I don't need to go to this meeting because ... If I find myself making excuses for anything, I'm in trouble. Because that means I'm slipping into denial, I'm justifying, I'm rationalizing, I'm minimizing, and this is a total addiction move, at least for me. If I'm using but or because, I need to stop, I need to pause. And I do that when I get complacent, and I do have to fight complacency. I've been in recovery not nearly as long as you have, but for 20 plus years now. And I do have to fight it sometimes. And then I love the outer circle. If you're a sex addict, hopefully you have a circle plan. If not, drop me an email and I'll send you an exercise so you can see one and do one, or you can find it in the Sex Addiction 101 workbook. But the outer circle is the healthy things we can do. And it does, we should be looking at things like boundaries and going slow and regular meetings regularly, which means we go to the same meetings every week so people can call us out if we're not there. But I also, I think we need to, I always leave like a day where I can mix it up. Like my Tuesday meeting, my Saturday meeting are set in stone. But on Friday, if I want to go somewhere else, I can. It's okay.
Right.
If I'm getting bored, and I give myself that privilege of, if I'm getting bored, to go explore.
Right.
So yeah.
But from what you just described, you did that in a structured way, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a framework around that exploration, which is
I'm an addict. I don't get to do willy-nilly decisions anymore.
Right. Exactly. There you go.
That doesn't go very well for me. So let's go to our questions here. My husband has been out of rehab since November and had a slip on Saturday night. Sorry to hear that. Then yesterday, over a money situation, he screamed at his group therapy, later with his therapist over the phone, and then other phone calls, detailed plans to come to my home. We're separated and murder me. Yuck. How do I separate the narcissistic addict from real possible mental disorder? He's left me extremely confused and terribly upset. Boy, I'm sorry to hear you going through this. David, thoughts?
Yeah, boy, talk about stress. I'm really sorry as well. You got me at that last detail there. I think sometimes we do see people money is often a trigger for people. Money and sex are triggers, and that can be stressful. And when we kind of, our bandwidth gets reduced with stress, we're less able to handle those things. And so screaming, a little extreme, but I've seen it. The kind of belligerence, plans to murder you is a little bit different flavor there. And I think that's worrisome to me. I don't know in what spirit that was said, but that's something I would be very concerned about. So, depending on who this person is, I am sorry he relapsed, but I think your question about separating that narcissistic addict from real possible mental disorder, he's been sober since November until Saturday night. It's really hard when I've talked about that here before. An addict, a full-blown addict, looks like someone who's antisocial, look like someone who's totally narcissistic, looks like someone with severe psychotic. They can be, I've had clients come in who have been diagnosed schizophrenic, bipolar, really severe mental disorders based on their addictive behavior. And so oftentimes with some time in recovery, that relapses. But I think the only way you can start to parse that out and kind of untangle that is time, in my experience, and some really, because it's almost like ruling out stuff based on behavior over time. Those sort of extreme behaviors should start to clear up. Now, this is obviously a clear setback. I think I would just say to you, I don't know that that's your job. I think that's the therapist's job to really start to separate that out and do that. I think what you can do and what you need to do in this case is reevaluate your boundaries in this situation and see what you need to do to keep yourself emotionally safe and physically safe, or whatever else you need to do to kind of put some boundaries around you, and turn over the mental health issue to the therapist. And I think, if I were this person's therapist, I don't think it would be a bad thing to receive a call from you saying that he had laid out these detailed plans. That's something that's definitely a mental health issue that he may want to take some action on, he or she, the therapist. So yeah, I think this is a troubling scenario, but I think what you need to worry about is keeping yourself physically and emotionally safe through boundaries and notifying people if you need to, who are more trained and equipped to start to differentiate what mental health issues may be going on here that need to be intervened upon. So if that's clear. Scott, anything to add to that one? That's a tough
No,
situation.
I 100% agree. Set boundaries to keep yourself safe emotionally and physically. If there's a threat, there's no way to know how real it is. You probably have a better idea than we do, but don't mess around with stuff like that.
Even if it's said in anger, I take those kind of words very seriously. And
yes, absolutely. If somebody says they're suicidal, if somebody says they're homicidal, a therapist like Dr. Fawcett is trained to, more antennas go up than, just a whole bunch of antennas go up there, and steps can be taken. So yeah.
Right.
Hello, I assume this is Dr., not Senor Fawcett. I have
the S and the D are close, but I kind of like Senor Fawcett.
Hello, hola, Senor Fawcett. I can speak a little bit of Spanish, but not enough. Hi, Dr. Fawcett. I have noticed that I am less likely to be complacent when I know my flaws and gaps, and I change my goalposts the moment I achieve it. Books and support groups have helped me to know what can be possible. How do you integrate recovery into life and not treat it separate from life so it is less tiring? Any tips? Great question.
Yeah, I love that question, because I think that for me, that once my recovery got stabilized, that was the big issue for me. It's like, and I remember hearing that slogan in AA, this program is a bridge back to life. And at some point I was so consumed with my recovery out of fear. I was going to 2 and 3 meetings a day for several years in early recovery, and I was really, which served me well. But at some point, I'd become really compulsive about my meeting attendance, and almost to the exclusion of life. I was starting to avoid kind of re-engaging in my life, and so I had the help of a therapist and a sponsor kind of help me walk into that, because how do I start to kind of step back into my life yet not lose my gains in program? And for me, they started to, my program life really started to be my life, right? A lot of my holiday parties or social events or Friday night meals or everything seemed to involve program people, which was great and nothing wrong with that. But I also started to feel a yearn for other kinds of things too, concerts and, you know, just fun trips somewhere and with that not weren't necessarily program based. So I think I did it carefully to start to reintegrate those other steps with guidance. I, like Scott was just saying, you know, we don't do stuff willy-nilly. I was really careful about what I did. But for me, I clearly lost the balance. I was overdoing meetings, and maybe some people will take offense to that. For me, it was just I was hiding out from my life by being in the rooms, which was not a bad place to be, right? It was keeping me alive, not really harming me, but I felt the need to kind of re-engage in a broader sense. And so, but I would say that probably didn't happen for me till like the second year, if not the third year. Looking back, it's hard to remember exactly. But I think it's a great question because when you have that self-awareness you're speaking of, you know, knowing your flaws, knowing those gaps, you can adjust and adapt accordingly. But I think eventually you want to see, how am I integrating this into, and I would use your circle plan. How am I integrating this into the outer circle? You know, what are those behaviors in the outer circle that I want to do more of? So, you know, I live in Florida, I live on the water, you know, I love to kayak. So kayaking is a wonderful activity, right? It's not necessarily program based. I can do it with program people, but I was starting to do more of stuff like that were nice adjuncts that gave me dopamine hit, but also kind of made my life more three-dimensional, if you will. Scott, how about you? What did you do with that?
Yeah, you know, the final exercise in this book, Sex Addiction 101, the workbook, which is used in conjunction with Dr. Rob's book, Sex Addiction 101, in our online sex addiction work groups, and people, you know, use them all over the place. The very last exercise is exactly this. You know, much earlier in the book, we've had everybody create their circle plan, and they have an outer circle, a green light circle. But usually it's very, very heavy on recovery and very, very light on other things. So the last exercise in this book is called From Shame to Grace. And basically it says, okay, let's revisit the outer circle. Let's revisit your green light activities and let's expand it. Because you will get bored if it's nothing but recovery. You know, all recovery and no play makes Scott a very dull and unhappy boy eventually. Early recovery, it's great to do a bunch of meetings and hang out only with recovery people because it's safe. But at some point, you know, we're in recovery not to avoid life. That's what our addiction was about, was avoiding life. We're in recovery so that we can get well and live a life. So hobbies, things with other people, both in and out of recovery. I have a number of normie friends. I have a game night with non-addicts, and I have a game night with addicts. But you know, I like my non-addicts too. You know, but hobbies, you know, just expanding the outer circle. Absolutely. Otherwise, you will get complacent or bored or just worn out. You know, there's it's a Stephen Covey, who's a time management guy. And you know, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and he talks about the woodcutter. There's 2 woodcutters, and they go out, and one of them just goes for 8 hours, and he chops like 20 trees. And the other guy looks kind of lazy. He goes and he pauses for a cup of coffee, and he has a sandwich, and he sharpens his saw, and then he goes again. And at the end of the day, he has 30 trees. It's because he pauses and sharpens his saw and rests, and it's much healthier to do that, and we're much more productive. So build some downtime into your life, but be careful with downtime. Make sure it's structured, and that you're not going to act out in your downtime. Unstructured free time, not so good. Structured free time, good.
Right. Beautiful.
Okay, next question. I believe the alcoholic is a lot easier to convince he has a problem than a sex addict, having dealt with that. My sex addict husband's CSAT undid the porn class by saying, She doesn't put labels on it. How can I, wow, I'm happy to hear that. How can I, the betrayed partner, combat that? Obviously, it's the wrong CSAT, but the damage is done.
Yeah, I mean,
I had this individual in my porn class. He's a porn addict. I love him, but he's a porn addict.
Okay, there you go. I think certainly sometimes with drugs and alcohol, it becomes more life-threatening and more obvious. So I think in those aspects, there's more things to point to if you're trying to convince somebody they have a problem. But I think with just a little bit of a closer look, there's many things for a sex and porn addict that are equally obvious and out of control. And I think, and not so subtle. And so I think with the right person and the right eyes open on the part of the addict, if you can get them there, and somebody who's kind of being straightforward and frank with what they're seeing, I think it's pretty clear sometimes to point that out. I'm really sorry to hear this, because I know when I was active and struggling with the idea of getting into recovery, I shopped around for anybody who would tell me what I wanted to hear. And that's unfortunate, because there are therapists out there, and I'm really sorry to see that, but who have these opinions. And I think they're incredibly harmful, because they just feed right into an addict's idea that, well, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe I'm one of those that can get away with, whatever we tell ourselves is crazy stuff. So I guess I would recommend a second opinion, a different CSAT. I mean, that's really unfortunate. And perhaps this person has some accountability partners or friends that can kind of set the record straight. And I think honestly, if someone's a porn addict, it sounds like they are, or a sex addict or any kind of addict, their behavior is going to be telling after a while. It's going to be obvious, and they might cling to a lone voice in the wilderness that said, no, you're not, but everybody else and in their own heart, they know they are. So I think eventually the truth does come out. But boy, this really is an unfortunate diversion, distraction that just causes a lot of grief for everybody, including you. So that's really unfortunate.
And if you need a second opinion, I'll give mine again. So, does that count as two? So, I know most people, I think there's less stigma around alcoholism and drug addiction, number one.
Yeah.
And I think, at least for me, because I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict and a sex addict, it was a lot easier to say, I'll let go of the alcohol and drugs than it was for me to say, I'll let go of the sex. It was just harder. And in my experience of talking to people and being around people who have the whole, the trifecta here, sex addiction always seems to be the hardest of the three, unless you throw meth in then, and then that gets really hard too. But and most people will get into recovery first for alcohol and drugs, and then later for sex addiction. I actually did it backwards because I'm weird, but 99 out of 100 who get into recovery for both will get into substance recovery first, and then the sexual behavior will.
And I've had clients who verbalize they would rather have a mental illness than be a sex addict, right? I'd rather be bipolar or something, which tells you the level of stigma around the sex addiction. But thank you. And it's very common. You're right, Scott, that we see a lot of people, including our own clients, who get into recovery from a substance first, and then either switch or their acting out behavior sexually or porn wise really escalates at that point. So yeah.
Next question here. I am a male addict in recovery for just under 1 year. Up until recently, I had a 5 out of 7 day weekly recovery schedule filled with groups, therapy, webinars, podcasts, research, reading, etc. I recently added a 12-step SAA meeting on the 6th day, leaving 1 day open dedicated for family and friends and fellowship. This week will be my 4th 12-step meeting. I think tonight means the 4th 12-step meeting. I've already asked for a sponsor and I've gotten 0 feedback. How long or how many times will I have to ask to get a sponsor? Another very good question. First of all, congratulations on having a nice full recovery schedule. And I actually applaud, if it works for you, leaving a day open. I do that. So how do we get a sponsor? What do we look for? How do we ask in an effective way, et cetera, et cetera?
Right. Well, first of all, I want to say I concur with what Scott just said. This is all good stuff that you're doing. So congratulations. And I'm not surprised you have a year because you're doing everything you should be doing. I think in terms of a sponsor, and a sponsor is a critical element, by the way. So I hope you can find one soon. I think what I recommend and what my own experience was first of all, really listening to people. And if there was somebody in a meeting that I identified with that would say stuff that I related with, that seemed to have some feelings or experiences that I related with, that was somebody I took an interest in. And to my surprise, that may not be a man. It may not be somebody who's gay or straight. It could be somebody who I wouldn't expect to look like they look, right? So I didn't necessarily look for that. Although I would say for a sex addict, it's probably best to have a male, if you're straight, to have a male sponsor in general, for sure. But beyond sort of just liking what somebody says, I think it's important to be vigilant and keep asking. My feeling is that even a temporary sponsor is better than the perfect sponsor, just because we need that accountability and that voice to talk to. So most meetings that I go to do have like a temporary sponsor feature. Even on Zoom, they have a place you can get in chat. And I would maybe recommend finding a meeting. If you go to one of these meetings, I'd be surprised if they didn't offer a temporary sponsor, and just try that to start, and then keep looking. But I think it's important to have somebody rather than the perfect one. And sponsor's not a marriage. You don't want to change we're using that willy-nilly word a lot tonight. You don't want to keep changing willy-nilly, but I think it's also if it's not a good fit, or if you change, or or schedules change or whatever, it's okay to look for another sponsor. But I think just having someone, and I think a good connection is the way to do it. And I just be persistent with that. Scott, I don't know, do you have other thoughts or things to add?
I always say, if you're having trouble asking for a sponsor, just ask somebody if they'd be willing to take a couple of phone calls from you. And then you establish a rapport with them and you say, hey, would you be willing to be a temp sponsor? And, work them up to it. I mean, give them a little sales job if you have to. If you've got somebody you really want to be a sponsor, but like David said, I'd rather have a temp sponsor who's not perfect than no sponsor. So what is a sponsor's job, David? That's sort of the next question here. What is a sponsor supposed to do for me as an addict?
Right, so a sponsor is definitely not a therapist, right? And 12-step therapist in recovery is different than but what a sponsor does, I think, is provide feedback, provide guidance. My idea of a sponsor is that there's someone a little bit farther down the same path than I am, right? They've had the experience. They can provide kind of a first-person guide and feedback and some wisdom and support, and also to kind of a realistic voice. If I need if I need someone to get real in my face, maybe that's what I need, right? I think these are people that I can trust to be, not to be a friend, although hopefully they can be friendly, but to me, a friend has the risk of
I'm not sure if it's me or David who's frozen. If it's David who has frozen, somebody chat me so I'll know.
What about you, Scott?
Okay, David froze. Okay, you froze on that. Thank you for. But I think we got the most of it. Every sponsee has different needs, and every sponsor has a different approach. When people come to me, and I don't really sponsor anybody anymore because my time won't allow it. But my response is, here's what I do. I'll take a call if you're in trouble, and we'll meet once a week, and we will work the 12 steps. Because I've done that and I can help you do it. And I think it's important. And then when we're through the 12 steps, it's time for you to find another sponsor. Because what I do is walk people through the 12 steps. Other people will micromanage your life for you if you want them to. That would make me insane on both ends of that equation. But some people like it. So yeah, find somebody who's got what you want in recovery, and I'm not talking about cash and prizes, I'm talking about smiles and friends and sobriety, and approach them. Yeah. So should we view, next question, should we view, excuse me, complacency as a risk to recovery or as a sign from your brain that something needs to change? If it's a sign, how do we diagnose that and figure out the change? Any structured tools for that? Another good question. So is it a risk to recovery or a sign that we need to make some changes, or both?
I would take out the or. I think it's both. Actually, I mean, it's certainly a risk to recovery because we can fall into that kind of loose engagement with our own recovery program, and that's a slippery slope for sure. But I think, we talked about novelty and sensation seeking and the risk of boredom and all that, and I think we can fall into these patterns where if we're not really actively engaged, we can fall into kind of autopilot. And I've heard clients actually use the term like check the boxes. Okay, I committed to 6 meetings a week. I'll go to 6 meetings a week, but I'm not really engaged in them. But I check the boxes, right? And you can get that, you can coast that way for a while, but I think eventually that's going to catch up with you. So I think yes, it is a risk, but I think also if you're in that, it is that a clear warning sign that something does need to change, and that may be your attitude, it may be your schedule, it may be your commitment. There's a lot of things there, and it's not unusual, as I said in the beginning, for us to bump up against resistance. We get anxiety, we get fear, we may have a trauma in our past that affects how we react to certain situations and people, and we get triggered, and all that's normal for the most part. But what's not normal, and what can never be normal, is how we are waking up every morning and recommitting and engaging.
I think David froze again. But what we talked about earlier with expanding the outer circle, the green light circle, this is, again, really important here.
Go ahead.
Are you back?
Yeah.
You've been freezing on us. So
I
go
am.
ahead.
Yeah. Anyway, I was just going to say, I'm going to get rid of my background in a minute. Maybe that's during the bandwidth.
That might help.
But I just think, yeah, things need to change, right? That is a sign that I'm not doing something I need to be doing. So
yeah,
go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, and what I was saying was, go to the outer circle, look at the outer circle, see what you're not doing that's in your outer green light circle, and start doing some of that stuff. And also maybe look at all of the stuff you are doing and figure out what you're enjoying versus what you're not enjoying. And maybe some of the things you're not enjoying, even if they're good for you, maybe try to replace them with something that's good for you that you will enjoy. Just mix it up a little. And I've done that with meetings, and then 3 months later, I'm ready to go back to this meeting that I know is a good meeting. I just got bored with it. So yeah, I mean, do mix it up a little bit, but consult with other people. Don't just randomly decide, I'm going to change everything. That's not a good idea. Consult with your therapist, consult with your sponsor, consult with your partner, your friends in recovery.
And maybe add on something different in time limit, maybe a big book study group where they go through all 12 steps or something. There's lots of options to kind of shake it up a little bit in a safe way. Yeah.
This next question, it's addressed to you, but I'm going to answer it. When will the next porn addiction level 1 groups start? I missed this time. I'm sorry you missed this time. We will have another one at the beginning of March. Tammy and I are going to set the schedule for the next round of online work groups tomorrow in the morning. So I'll get everything posted hopefully tomorrow afternoon or Friday at the latest, but it'll be early March for the next porn addiction group. We have a sex addiction group, which I think starts February the 18th, and various other things starting up.
If
so
I could just say,
and we'll get it posted as soon as I can.
And I think these groups, by the way, they're psychoeducational. They're really great groups, and I think they're also very useful for even people who've been through treatment, people that are well into their recovery. These cover kind of foundational aspects, and they provide that community that we always talk about, that connection through the duration of the class. So I think these are really, no matter where you're at in your recovery, I think there's something you can gain from these groups.
Yeah, these are a great adjunct to therapy. They're a great adjunct to 12-step work. They're a great continuation of treatment for alumni of the treatment center. I've had a number of
Right.
alums sign up for these groups. And they are a great way to connect, particularly the porn addiction group. Sometimes the guys are almost in tears just hearing someone else who's having the same problems. It can be so powerful just to let the guys talk about what they're struggling with,
Yeah.
And then to give them some information. But yeah, it's not therapy. We don't process in there. It's education. So yeah, and they're very inexpensive. I think it's $350 for 6 weeks or something, and it doesn't get any better than that. So the affirmations. Okay. I'm reading the book Facing Love Addiction by PM Melody. Now that I discovered what was going on with myself and my partner, how do I heal? The author's description of the love addict and love avoidant describes exactly what was going on. As an avoidant, he, the partner is drained, and as a love addict, I am deprived. Now, what do I do other than self-care to heal and avoid repeating my love addict patterns? My fear is I will carry my patterns to other relationships. So can you talk a little bit about, maybe in addition to this question, maybe a little bit about attachment styles and
Yeah.
interacting? Because
That's
that is what
kinda-
happens a lot.
That's where I was going with that. First of all, congratulations, a lot of awareness here in this question. So I do appreciate that. I think, and I agree with you that unless we heal these patterns, we carry them on to the next relationship. They keep repeating until they get corrected. So I think you're correct there too. So what we're getting a lot more information about in the last 10 years or so is the whole idea of attachment styles and how people, and by attachment we mean how do we connect with other people, how do we relate, what are the nature of our relationships, and the style that everybody aspires to is what's called a secure attachment style, where we can my partner and I can have an argument, but we're not going to, neither of us is going to go to like divorce, or our relationship can tolerate a little bit of conflict or distress because we know it's solid and secure underneath. And I think that's the one. Then it's not a brittle relationship. There's several other designated kinds of, there's three others actually, there's four kind of styles of attachment, secure being one, but the others involve the avoidance you're speaking of, and that's classic addict, by the way. Addicts avoid. That's the hallmark of addiction. We don't want to talk about problems. We defer. We avoid situation. We avoid emotional pain. We just avoid boredom. So it's a bad way to get in. But when it comes to a relationship or a marriage or a partnership, that's a real problem because we avoid some of the issues that build up over time. And like you're describing, very often the avoidant addict will somehow match up with someone who kind of fills in that empty space, right? If the addict is avoiding stuff, they might get in a relationship with somebody who kind of fills in that space and does the other stuff, kind of carries the emotional burden, the emotional life for both people on themselves. And so, yeah, I mean, this is an issue. Anxious styles, there's avoidance styles, there's anxious avoidance styles. So very often we see also with addicts who are anxious avoidant, where they're really anxious to be connected to somebody, but as soon as they get into a relationship or somebody gets close, they feel smothered and overwhelmed, right? So they want it, but they don't. And so there's mixed messages. So these relationship styles are very confusing at first, but I'd recommend that you read some, there's a lot of literature out there on attachment styles, and it's very enlightening because you're going to see yourself in these four styles. You're going to see your partner in those four styles. And I think by better understanding the specifics of those different attachment styles, you can see where you need to do the work to correct whatever you need to do and move out of that toward secure attachment. And a lot of this, by the way, has to do with our life story, right? With trauma, with early childhood experiences, with early relationships. It's kind of everything that we've experienced in life we bring to these relationships. And a lot of the times those we've developed these styles not consciously, but as a way of kind of keeping ourselves safe, or the someone who maybe is the caretaker, the one who gives too much, if you will, may be kind of a person that feels they need to earn their relationship or work extra hard to be in a relationship. So there's all understanding those kind of core beliefs about yourself underneath that's driving this, almost like software, is really important. The important thing also is that these things can be changed, right? These are not destiny. We're not locked into these attachment styles for life. It just takes some awareness, usually takes some therapy and some guidance, and you can really make some moves there. And I think by better understanding you and your patterns and your history and your kind of unconscious needs and desires, and sort of making those conscious, you can really start to create a difference. But I think, yeah, attachment styles is the thing, and there's a lot of books out there on that now. And you can, there's a very large study called the Experiences in Close Relationships study, and it's where these 4 attachment styles are outlined, and it's now the assessment has been done by thousands of people, and you can do that online. If you just Google Experiences in Close Relationships survey, you can take a little online assessment and kind of get an idea of where you land and what that looks like. And that also will give you some guidance to work with a therapist on how do you kind of move out of that toward a direction that you want to be in.
I just type the Experience in Close Relationships survey into the chat feature for anybody who wants it. I'm going to ask a question that's not being asked here and not being asked in the follow-up, but I think it's an important question anyway. A relationship where we've got somebody who's come, and somebody's like, no, too close. You know, we have this opposite attract thing. Is that relationship doomed, or can it heal? And if it can heal, what needs to happen for it to heal?
You know, I don't think such relationships are doomed at all. I think what it takes is, first of all, willingness to really look at these patterns and some work with a therapist. And I would say a lot of times people try to approach this in the context of couples therapy. And couples therapy is incredibly important in terms of communication skills and understanding some of these dynamics. But when we talk about attachment styles, the starting point in my mind has to be the individual. So I would really look at that in an individual therapy setting, get an idea of that. It's a much safer place to explore these without kind of the complicating dynamics of somebody else's attachment style kind of bouncing around and sloshing around in this relationship until we get clear. And then we can start to make those changes, and then it's useful to come together. But I think that it takes some insight, it takes some willingness to change, it takes some courage, because what keeps us locked into these attachment styles usually is fear. You know, fear I'm going to be alone, fear I'm going to be smothered, you know, whatever the fear is, depending on what quadrant you're in those attachment styles, they can all impact what we do. But absolutely, with some insight and willingness, we can change. And a therapist that works with attachment styles will help people move toward that secure attachment place where we can have an argument, where I can have my needs met without feeling I have to sacrifice too much to get, you know, to keep you with me, and that kind of stuff. All those kind of mistaken notions about who we are and what we need can be kind of updated and to the place where we can really have a healthy and much more satisfying relationship.
Yeah, I agree completely. If you're sort of, you know, working towards secure attachment and your partner is working towards secure attachment, you know, you may not ever, either of you, get there 100%, but you can get close enough where you can both be a lot happier and a lot more comfortable in a relationship together with the person who is, you know, still, as long as you're both coming, you know, to the center. If one of you is doing work and the other one's not, you know,
right.
Usually
and I would say,
yeah,
I would add 2 things here. One is the benefit of regular, and I would say daily check-ins with a couple, where they really, even only 10 minutes, where they can really just share what's going on and stay in touch, because that communication is really, really key. And then as they move toward each other, to really be willing to see what's going on and make changes and employ boundaries. Because I think boundaries are really the key here. If boundaries where if I'm in a position where I'm giving way too much in a relationship because I'm afraid I'll be alone, then I need to sort of see how I can, where do I stop and where do you start? And how do I kind of manage that without feeling like a victim or without getting resentment or, all of that stuff that we get into in relationships. And the same thing goes with the avoidant person. They need to see, okay, well, I need to really express my feelings and express my fears and whatever, and sort of have those boundaries as well. So boundaries, I think, are really critical.
Yeah, and it's not unusual, I'll speak as an addict, for an addict to walk in being really, really, really relationally avoidant. That is what we do. That's what addiction is. We're avoiding interacting with other people in an intimate way because it's too scary. So we turn to our addiction, which reliably kind of gets us out of our pain temporarily, but it gets us there. And for me, I dealt with covert incest issues and enmeshment, and the thought of letting somebody into my space was scary. It was overwhelming, to the point where I was diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder, when I think misdiagnosed. When I got into early recovery, schizoid personality disorder means, you're perfectly, if everyone on earth died, and you woke up tomorrow and you were the only one left, you'd be like, okay, fine. And at the beginning, it kind of made sense to me, but in reality, that's not the case. But I had to rework my way back to, I had to earn security by starting small, with a therapist, somebody I was paying to listen to me, and then a sponsor who had the same problems I did, and then some people in recovery, and then some people not in recovery. And, it's always the betrayed partner who's the last one invited to the party, because the betrayed partner is the scariest of all. Right. You're the one that can hurt the other person the most. So, kind of stinks for you, but, if he's willing to, now the follow-up to this is the relationship has ended. But if you're in a relationship like this and both of you do work, I mean, this is kind of what we talked about a minute ago. It really
that relationship ended, but the next one is going to be the same thing. So, right. I mean, this is important work to do.
Yeah, and that's the point that's made in the follow-up. This relationship is pretty much over, but I'm doing the work because I don't want to do this again. And I think that's great. Now, in addition to doing the work of, healing from love addiction and healing from this sort of clingy, needy thing, and I don't mean that in a bad way. In addition to that, should this individual also implement a dating plan? And get some support for dating for future relationships?
Yeah, that's a great point. And before I do that, I just want to underscore something you just said, because it was so important. A lot of times couples think, well, this is work. These are skills that have to be learned in the context of the intimate relationship. And these skills for relating to people are with everybody. And we often talk about with our clients in LA, these are a group of men, right, and grouped together, learning intimacy. And what is intimacy? Intimacy is being vulnerable. Intimacy is learning to trust somebody with revealing who you are and hoping they won't reject you or throw you away or run from the room screaming. And that's the building blocks of intimacy. So it can happen in all these different levels of social interaction. It doesn't have to start with the intimate partner. And Scott made a great point, because in fact, the intimate partner is usually the last one, or one of the last ones, because as Scott said, that's the riskiest relationship of all. That's the one, where everything's up for grabs. And so it does happen. Boy, I'm tired. What was the second point there that we were going to talk about?
Sorry, I don't know, but I did want to add, if you want to learn how to be more than a friend with somebody, learn how to be a friend with somebody first. Work your way up the ladder.
And that actually brings up what we're going to talk about, the dating plan. So
yes, dating plan. Sorry, thank you.
So we recommend, to get out of this idea of compulsive hookups and sexual hookups and all the kind of acting out people do, we recommend a dating plan. And that kind of throws everything on its head, because what we're doing with the dating plan is we we invite somebody to coffee, and we maybe coffee again, then maybe dinner, then maybe a movie, and then maybe we're starting to think about something more intimate. But what does that do? It's the reverse of what the normal addictive process is. It allows us to connect with somebody at an emotional level, to see them as a person, to not just a sexual being, but a full three-dimensional person. And so those dating plans really do start to give us, allow us to practice these attachment skills in a way that's not quite so threatening and overwhelming. So yeah, dating plans are a great idea.
It's important to be incredibly intentional as you start dating, particularly while you're in recovery. I mean, first you need a list of goals, and then you need a list of red lights. Like, these are absolute no-nos. Like, still lives with his family, still in a relationship, you know,
Still married.
is an active addict, things like that. You know, I will not date you if, boom, 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 boom.
Right.
And then you have yellow lights. Again, I love my red lights and yellow lights and green lights. Yellow lights are, you know, well, he's underemployed, or, you know, he seems a little narcissistic, or he's often late without calling, you know, things like that. And then you have green lights, like we have lots of mutual interests and this, you know, so you do that and you discuss that with your posse, you know, your peeps, right. And get their sign off, like, oh, you forgot this red light. You always go for this, and you never, you know, give anybody credit for this, but it's really a green light. You know, they'll help you. And then, you know, when you go on your coffee date, then you get to rehash it with them afterwards, and they'll tell you everything that was good and bad, because often our pickers are broken. That's why we're here.
And when we're first, you know, engaging with somebody, there's this thing called limerence we've talked about here before, which is this hormonal rush of oxytocin and other things that really is a mood altering experience that kind of makes our judgment not very accurate. You know, we see somebody, and when we're first meeting somebody, there's a whole bunch of stuff we don't know. So we make it up. We fill in the gap ourselves, and it's not always accurate. We make assumptions about somebody, and our posse can help us do a reality check on that. So it's really important, and it slows the whole thing down.
Yeah. We are out of time. I got a question here I'm just going to take this. We're going to run over 1 minute. Can concepts of internal family system and parts therapy be useful in couples therapy in the context of betrayal?
Wow, I love that.
That's a big question. You want me to hold that until next week?
Yeah, I'll just do a teaser. Yes, but yeah, let's hold it next week. Okay. That's a great question. I love that. Yeah.
I'm going to save this question, and we will add it at the beginning of next week. So please come back, and we'll answer that first and foremost next week. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, David. Thank you for the great questions today. And we'll see you next Wednesday. The meeting's going to be open for half a second while I copy and paste this, and then I'll close it. So. Good night.
Okay, good night, everybody. Bye-bye.